So hello everyone. Thanks everyone for taking the time and joining me to this session. Um, my name is Almog and I'm one of the founders of Javelin Network and also the chief product. We are the world's first intrusion detection and containment platform for domain environment. Today I'm going to talk about the differences between our product and Microsoft ATA. As well as talking about Active Directory security issues and how Javelin can help you minimize this gap. So let's start. I guess all the participants here in this session know very well Active Directory. My personal opinion is that it's a great product from a management point of view. It makes the admin's life very comfortable, but it has a serious security flaws by design. The Active Directory developers' mindset was different back then, and now it's very hard to rewrite the code and make it more secure. So today I'm going to talk about these security issues and how ATA can't really protect you and why Javelin can. Microsoft acquired an Israeli startup in 2014 called Arato. Which totally makes sense then because they needed an offer for their customers to have a better AT protection. Currently, to my knowledge, this is the only native security solution by Microsoft protecting the AD environment. One of the biggest showstoppers to me deploying ATA solution would be their actual product presence. Meaning you have basically two options. One is having an external port mirror the traffic for all the domain controllers through their gateway server and collect also the DC logs from all the DC, of course. Now imagine you have 100 or 200 domain controllers located on different physical sites. To me, it doesn't really sound feasible. The second option, which is probably more common today, would be installing their new agent flavor on each domain controller. So for the demo today, I have an environment with 4 domain controllers, so we can see together what ATA agent presence would look like with no real traffic. Great. So hopefully you see my screen. You can see a live Microsoft ATA system where we have 4 gateways. The way ATA works is you have a dedicated virtual machine or physical machine for management. They call it center management. And you need to install if you decide to use the agent flavor, you have a gateway and the agent software flavor on each domain controller. So this environment specifically for this demo, we have 4 domain controller. You can see that for all of them, this ATA agent is running. And the importance is, first of all, knowing what the agent looks like from a memory and CPU consumption. This environment is not really a production, so the CPU would be very minimal. But even for such an environment, you can see that from a memory point of view, you have almost half a gig memory presence, and it would be the same for each of the DC. So this is just a quick look about the presence of the agent flavor. If I go back to the presentation, another important factor other than the memory and CPU consumption, we all know that software can have bugs, and it's okay. I mean, developers can do mistakes. But in this case, this bug would be on your domain controllers. Meaning the potential damage here can be huge. Your entire network can be down. Domain controllers are the backbone of your network when it comes to Active Directory. And this is why such presence can be very dangerous. So assuming you decided that you can live with such deployment, the only capabilities in the end of the day that ATA currently has is detection and alerting. ATA can't really mitigate the attack. In terms of detection, they are very limited to specific scenario, which is mainly because of their solution presence. There is a limitation, even if you are the best developer in the world, there is a limitation for the things you can detect when you live inside the DC only. I will cover, of course, in the demo some of the main evasion technique, but it's already publicly known on many websites, and attackers already equipped with that knowledge. In terms of deployment, if you have large-scale Active Directory environment and network, it would be a very difficult job to install and deploy it. And worst, if you have multiple AD forest, according to the prerequisite documents, you need to have multiple ATA systems. So moving forward, and with that in mind, I would like to introduce my company and our value proposition and why I believe we have stronger offer for Active Directory security. Active Directory used to be considered as trustworthy environment where every domain connected user and computer can query for almost everything that lives in its Active Directory. From application and management point of view, you have wonderful API access, but at the same time, it's also heaven to attackers. The world has changed dramatically, and everyone are connected to the network some way or another, and the financial incentive for attackers is getting higher all the time. From my experience, it's also impossible to stop the intrusion, and your only chance is stopping them in your own house, meaning the post-breach phase, the lateral movement, the credential stealing, the reconnaissance. We see it on every report that Active Directory is the underlying layer for every simple attack or even advanced persistent threats. The methodology is the same, getting the Active Directory information that the attacker needs, using LDAP or other stealthy built-in protocol. They are not using today any network scan or port scanning. This is very noisy. Afterwards, they are simply dumping the credential using Mimikatz or other tools. And then they simply travel the network like you have a legitimate passport between countries. And these simple techniques are not belong only to advanced persistent threats. It's also become very common to see it in ransomware attacks, where they can eventually encrypt more computers and get more money, of course. It's all about ROI in the end of the day from attacker point of view. With this long problems introduction, I want to explain how Javelin solution would solve these security issues. Our company mission statement is controlling the attacker's perspective. We want to provide him bad intelligence regardless the technical methodology he's been using. So every false path that the attacker going to use, whether it's Active Directory identity, computer, server, Kerberos ticket, Javelin will detect it and contain it, which is very important, not just detecting it. Before going live with the demo, I'll try to simplify how we do this magic. First, our software in this blue box learns the Active Directory database automatically to create an obfuscated layer according to the customer's naming scheme structure. Then we push this presence to each and every endpoint that you want to protect. I want to show you quickly on the dashboard, in Javelin dashboard, to show you how it looks like from a deployment point of view. So once you install and configure Javelin, all you need to do to install this unique presence and this protection through your network is simply select the endpoint you want to protect. You can filter it by OUs. You can filter it by using sites and subnet. You can basically have the entire Active Directory presentation in our automatic deployment learning mechanism. Or you can simply select all the endpoints, hit the deploy button, and just push the presence, this unique presence, into each and every endpoint in the organization. Behind the scene, we are going after SMB. We are doing it remotely from our virtual machine to each and every endpoint and injecting it into the memory to look like eventually as a seamless presence on the endpoint. Moving forward, to simplify the way we do it, after we push this unique presence, the attacker will have eventually a different perspective and the data about the Active Directory elements. There is no honeypot or distributed honeypot here. It's all client-side manipulation for the Windows OS. No honeypot at all. Sorry for that. The second phase, after detecting the attack, the system automatically collecting forensics element from the compromised endpoint and present it very simply in the UI, so the security guy can better understand what really happens. You will also see it, of course, in the live demo today. And the final step would be contain the attack and kill the attacker's processes and presence. It can be both manual or automatic. It's totally configurable. We know that companies don't have the manpower to look all day long in their system dashboards, and we managed to implement this solution to be totally automatic and seamless. Detection, forensics, containment, preventing this post-breach lateral movement. So this was an introduction about the system, how we differ from Microsoft ATA. The demo now would be a bit technical. I will try to simplify the commands and the things I'm going to do here. If you have questions, write it down, and we'll try to answer and address every one of them.
Great, thank you, Almog. While you're getting that together, I'd like to launch a poll here to see if anybody actually uses anything to protect Active Directory today. So if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes here. Second, while you're answering these questions, if you would like to enlarge your screen, there is a button at the top of the GoToWebinar screen that has a zoom button. If you go to 75%, you'll get a very solid view without over enlarging the screen. If you do go to 100%, you'll probably need to adjust the box of the screen so that you can follow along, because the demo here will be a bit of code that Almog is going to show you. So I just wanted to let you know that you each and every single one of you individually have the opportunity to zoom your own screen so you can see this. Thank you very much. I appreciate you spending some time here on this poll, and I will close that and I will show you quickly the results. 71% of you don't do anything, and roughly 30% of the attendees and about almost 60% of the attendees voted. So very significant number here on both sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Great. So with that introduction again, I will try to do some demos that will even give you a better sense how we can detect stuff that ATA can't really do it. So let's start. Great. So this specific computer is a Windows 10 normal operating system where we have multi-user here. In terms of domain environment, is only domain user, but for this simplified demo, I made him also a local admin, so I can run some Mimikatz and other tools. But in terms of domain, it's not a domain admin or anything. I will try to show you this one. As you can see, this Modi user is a domain user, and locally is also a local admin. Again, just to make it simplified to run some Mimikatz tools. And I will start with a reconnaissance phase where every post-breach really happens. Cool. So I will leave these two screen, the PowerShell and the CMD, before I deploy Javelin to this endpoint. Right now, as you can see from the deployment, it's already deployed. So just to show you before and after, I'll do some undo deploy now. I really want to show you before Javelin and after Javelin, how it looks like from the attacker point of view. Great. So reconnaissance and information gathering when it comes to Active Directory can be done with so many ways. You can use the built-in net commands. You can use the ADSI search engine. You can use external libraries like the PowerView, which is very common. You have like more than 10 techniques here that you can basically reconnaissance this environment. And currently ATA, as far as my knowledge, they can do detection only to this net command, and only if they manage to learn the network, which they have some sort of grace time, like 20 days or something. So I will show you what this OS would look like before and after Javelin. This command are simply net commands doing some information gathering to the network. This right now is the actual OS without Javelin. The same command and the same reconnaissance can be done using PowerShell and ADSI searcher, as I mentioned. It's very important to remember and know that this reconnaissance command can be done basically by any user. Once you have this connected domain and user, you can do these commands and you can reconnaissance the network. This is the underlying assumption for Active Directory with this wonderful trust. So this is how it looks like before Javelin installed the presence on this endpoint. And if I go to this specific dashboard and I will try to launch Javelin deployment only to this endpoint, you can see, of course, that the IP address is indeed 1510. It's the same endpoint. And I'm going to launch the same command. Just put these windows side by side so you can see before and after. And I hit also another command where we get information about the computers. If I minimize this PowerShell, you can see it even with your own eyes, what it would look like with Javelin and without Javelin. You can see here that for the same domain admin reconnaissance command, before Javelin you have like 8 users, and after Javelin you have many more. The entire concept of this solution is manipulating this Windows environment so every reconnaissance command will get a different perspective to the attacker. The same goes for computers. As you can see here, we have many more computers. These computers, of course, most of them are not real, and we can control the amount of endpoints that are being created after Javelin installing it. We can even make it more simplified before and after by running the same ADSI searcher. The measure command is just counting the amount of computers we have in this environment. So you can see before Javelin installed this unique presence, we have only 110 users, 110 computers, sorry. And after Javelin installed the presence, you have 700 computers. This is a real game changer. If you consider a large environment where they have thousands or tens of thousands computers and users, it would be much amplified by this mechanism, and the attacker would basically have totally different perspective and intelligence, and it will be failed gathering information, the right information. So at this point, we didn't do any detection yet. Right now, it's only implant this unique presence, and we don't detect anything. Also, this ATA product obviously didn't detect anything. Let's see how Javelin can really detect the actual attack. In terms of information gathering, the second step in most cases would be validating which computer and user is valid for the attack. So from our side, we are very deterministic in a way that even the slightest ping or any lateral movement attempt or any network connectivity verification would be caught by Javelin solution. So Another important thing to mention from an attacker point of view is the attacker doesn't really care about all the computers in the environment. He cares really about computers that probably have some crown jewel, like SQL, IIS, any other application, file server. These kind of computers are would be the first target for the attacker. So in this case, I just filter all the obfuscated plus the real environment objects, and we see all the objects that have some SQL suffix in this environment. So if I try to ping any of the obfuscated object, even ping, I can also do net use. It doesn't really matter which kind of lateral movement and network connectivity verification I will try to use. Let's take, for example, another server. In normal environment, this kind of activity would be succeeded, or at least getting some sort of response. From our side, once the attacker did some kind of interaction with the obfuscated layer, we automatically detect this kind of activity, and you can see it as classified as computer information gathering. You see both computers' names on that list, which is exactly what we were doing on that endpoint. As I was saying on the introduction, not only we are doing this detection and give you some basic information, we also have a detailed report, a detailed forensics report about the entire activity. So for example, we have multiple sections here. On the memory analysis, which is a proprietary development, we have all the process tree here as it was relevant to the attack. So for example, if I will open this PowerShell, I can know what kind of command and activity the attacker was doing specifically even for that process. Another cool thing that we are extracting from the memory is the actual content of the shell, meaning if the attacker was trying to do some net use or ping or whatever reconnaissance command he was trying to do, we would see it in the forensics report on the memory analysis section. We classified, of course, we don't present you any other process other than the ones that was relevant to the attack. We also have some quick IOC to help you to understand quickly where some artifacts were in this endpoint location. I won't review each and every section in this forensics, but it's very in-depth information about the endpoint environment, where you can see basically everything, processes, file system stuff, everything that's relevant to forensics analysis. And the final step of this activity would be basically mitigate and contain the attack. This method that I'm going to show you is going to be, can be both for automatic way and manual way. For this specific demo, I just want to do it manually so you can see the difference before and after. So let's go quickly to the actual prompt that was belong to the attack. Let's say I have this CMD process that's relevant to that attack. I will see the process ID, which is 1132. And if I go to the Javelin system and find this process ID and click the mitigate, behind the scenes, we are going to launch a unique mitigation techniques to contain only that specific process. Meaning if I try to do any kind of activity from that specific process, you would get this access is denied, meaning this process is contained. If I try to do a create process, I will get access is denied. Everything will be contained to that specific process. So this is the beauty. The operating system is not being affected. If you have normal user where you have some Excel, you have browsers and other stuff, they won't be affected by this system. We only contain the detected malicious activity, and we contain that specific process. So this was the most basic attack where the attacker was trying to do some information gathering. Let's see if ATA managed to do some kind of detection. We can see that this kind of activity, of course, wasn't detected by ATA. It's also very important to understand the current mindset of the attacker where he is trying to do and go stealthy after the crown jewel of the company. It is not going very noisy like automatic ransomware. In most cases, it takes time to intrude, to go into the network. It takes time to compromise it. And when it comes to post-bridge, you need to go stealthy. You don't want to trigger any alarm, any other system. So when you have such a solution like Javelin with a different reality, it would be much easier to detect such kind of activity. The next demo is also a very common scenario. We see it, of course, on each and every campaign and attack. Even if you have any computers that you want to attack and it's legitimate, one of the obfuscated objects that Javelin inject to this endpoint would be an identity, meaning that most attackers, once they have this local system presence and they can launch eventually Mimikatz, right? It's just a matter of time until it gets in some local system, and I'm going faster directly to this Mimikatz section. Eventually they will get there. I think that we are the only companies that really wants the attacker to launch Mimikatz, because afterwards the attacker will use our obfuscated objects and then eventually fail. So let's save some time and typing and simply run this Mimikatz command. I will explain what I was doing. Launching Mimikatz, meaning it's an external utility where you can parse the LSAS component and grab the credentials from the memory. In most cases, you have many domain admins in the environment where their presence is located in the LSAS. And once the attacker has this domain admin hash or clear text password, he basically can do anything in terms of domain authentication and authorization. So Mimikatz, I dumped the output of Mimikatz to this Mimikatz dump.txt file, and from there I took all the logon password of this specific memory. So if I go to this directory and open this Mimikatz dump, you would see multiple things. One, you would see the legitimate user called Morty. It's a domain user. He can't really do anything. He's a domain user, and therefore he can't do any kind of lateral movement inside the network, only local stuff. The second important thing that you would see is Javelin presence, meaning on the upper section, you can see a user called Rick Pickle admin. By the name, you can see that he's an admin. I will show you also that the attacker would do some extra verification to know that this user is also a domain admin. And once you have this access, you can dump the hashes, the NTLM. You can dump even the password. If you have some clear text mechanism like wdigest, you would see it here. So the attacker, of course, would not fall in this trap just because this user called the Rick Pickle admin. So from that point, usually he will try to figure out this way or another if this user is indeed a domain admin. Sorry for this typo. And we can see on this list that Rick Pickle admin is indeed a domain admin from this query. So from an attacker point of view, he basically thinks that he has this domain admin credentials. He can do anything in the network because he has this the highest privilege that he can inside this specific domain. And any attempt to do pass the hash, pass the ticket, overpass the hash using this credential would get him caught. This is the beauty of this solution. It looks very authentic, and the attacker really want to use it because it happens in most cases in most organizations. So this is why it's very authentic. So the next step from an attacker point of view would be basically trying to run in the context of this Rick Pickle admin. Right now I'm in the context of Morty, is the domain user as I mentioned. And if I want to run in the same context of Rick Pickle admin, I can do the run as, I can do some other techniques, but this is the most simple one. And let me grab the password for this user that he thinks that might be correct. as you can see from the output, no matter how many times this going to be done, the attacker will fail, and you can see that the password is incorrect. This might be, again, a normal behavior, password being changed on the network, and the attacker will fail. But behind the scene, Javelin automatically detect another alert called overpass the hash. We managed to identify that from the same source, we also got some overpass the hash technique using this deceptive user. This is from a domain controller perspective. And go quickly just to show you that this is not really a domain admin, if you're skeptical about it. So as you can see, Rick Pickle admin is only a domain user. It's a low privilege user, but the beauty of this solution is that from the client side perspective, from the Windows OS perspective, again, if I run the netgroup domain admin command, I will see that user on that list. So therefore, I have no reason to suspect that this can be some kind of deceiving a presence on that endpoint. It looks very authentic. I have the credentials, and I have no really reason not using it from an attacker point of view. Let's go again to the actual detection. We detect as this overpass the hash, and again, I have all the forensics report that I need, all the forensics information that I need, just to give you another quick look about the. Right now, I can launch, for example, the Mimikatz. Let's try to contain this process again. Quickly see what kind of process ID. It's 42000 right now. As you can see, the same process ID here. I simply click this process ID, mitigate this CMD, and now you can see that this specific process is not able to do anything. It's contained. You can't really create process. You can't communicate with the network. You can't really do anything. Great. So I hope that this makes sense to all of you. And I want to move to another demo, of course. Let's just verify that ATA, it didn't detect anything. As you can see, again, nothing.
Okay, that's an important piece there, Omog, just to show all the work that you just did was in a laboratory environment which actually had ATA running, so that you could see that even with ATA installed, or even frankly any network product installed, it's not going to detect any activity because the attacker is coming from the endpoint. Javelin resides on the endpoint, and it's interrupting the query commands from the endpoint. So the general value that you'll get is that the attacker may have compromised a single machine, but they're not getting any further. They're going to get no valid information about the domain itself, and they're not going to penetrate that single computer to move laterally to the rest of the network.
Exactly, exactly. Great. So the next scenario would be another common scenario, assuming that I don't have any credential in the LSAS. I can use like two more common techniques. One would be like noisy brute force, which unfortunately, if you are doing user and password, ATA again doesn't really detect because they are relying if you are doing multiple passwords for the same account. So if you're doing one user and one password and then doing it through the entire users, you won't really be detected by ATA. So if you are familiar with Nishang platform, you have many cool features inside to do these post-bridge elements. Right now, I just import some of the code of Nishang PowerShell scripts. And I want to show you also a brute force for multiple users. So I have here two files. I have one list of users. It's not just a list of users. I took them from the domain admin list. Meaning that I simply took this list, for example, you can see that it's just partial list from that domain admin list. And I'm going to use that list in this brute force methodology attack. So I have this users list. I can, of course, extend it and add more users. And I have some password list. I can use like many more of them, but it's not really relevant. You would see that ATA is not able to detect and Javelin, yes. So what I'm doing now is just calling the brute force function, use this user list against with this password list within this specific McDonald's demo Active Directory environment, meaning that after hitting this button, this specific shell was trying to run against all these users and password combination. And when you go to the Javelin dashboard, you would see another alert called user information gathering, and also this forensics report immediately after we detect this user list. So you can see that from the same source, we have all the users that the attacker was trying to brute force. We add it into this very simplified UI information. We also have the same forensics information. We can mitigate the PowerShell as I was doing before. It's just simply another common scenario where Javelin can easily detect and where ATA can't really handle it because of their limited presence. I'm not saying they don't have any good developers. I'm just saying that when you develop a solution and your presence is on the domain controller, you have limitation when it comes to attackers. The problem is that attacker now knows all the evasion techniques that can be done against this ATA, and you can't really do anything about it. If I have time, Greg, do you want me to move on to another demo, or do you want to stop me and do some other things?
Let's answer a few questions here, which have been very, very good. I think I want to thank everybody for your questions that have come across. So one of the questions that came up to answer generally, and I've been answering them privately, was how does Javelin interact with other products in the network, like Darktrace or others, as they learn what's normal and abnormal?
Okay, this is a good question, of course. The way Javelin works is we have passive presence in the endpoint, meaning that if you have network presence, network solution, we don't really care as long as we have connectivity to this endpoint list. Once we manage to deploy our presence to the network, this unique presence is going to remain passively on the endpoint, waiting for the attackers to launch their attack. If you have endpoint solution, we are currently working with all the vendors, whether it's McAfee, Symantec, even if you are working with Silence or SentinelOne, if you have some next-gen endpoint security, everything is working together seamlessly with Javelin. They don't really know about our existence because we have a very unique methodology how to inject this memory and also how to remain there very stealthy that the attacker can't really know. Quickly, I would just say that even if you open this task manager or any process management utility, you won't find anything on that list that would lead to understanding that Javelin exists on that endpoint. So again, it's like a memory presence, very unique one, and we don't interfere with other products.
Great. Second question, and a follow-up question is, can you send logs out to a SOC or any syslog server like Splunk or ArcSight or other product?
Yeah, so from operational point of view, we are getting better each and every day implementing and integrating with other security solution. This is a very basic one. You basically can add forwarding, whether it's UDP, TCP, or other mechanism to a syslog server. We would soon have also support for REST API, whether it's Splunk or other provider. But in general, all the big vendors like ArcSight, QRadar, Splunk, when it comes to syslog forwarding, if you want to see these alerts there, we simply just add forwarding and hit what kind of IP address you have Splunk, and that's it basically.
Okay, another question. Would you expand on the attacker's use of command prompts and PowerShells, but also what about things like a Metasploit, Metinterpreter, or other approach an attacker might make? How does Javelin deal with that?
Right. This is a good question. Eventually, when you are dealing with attack, Metasploit and any other attacking system is not connected, in most cases, connected to the Active Directory. The idea is to have some sort of stager inside this Windows OS, meaning that you would have eventually some sort of stager, PowerShell or a batch file that's going to communicate with the Cobalt Strike or with the Metasploit, and it would be a proxy between the Metasploit and the Active Directory network. And once you have this stager inside this Windows OS, everything goes through Javelin, and therefore all these scenarios that I just presented and the result would be the same. It doesn't really matter if it's Metasploit, Empire, Cobalt Strike, it would be also the same.
Great, thank you. Another question goes back to kind of the beginning of the presentation relative to, does Javelin replace ATA or does it work with it? Can you work with them together, or how would you recommend one consider Javelin? We presented it as versus ATA, but it probably goes along just as well as it does replacing it.
So if you already have ATA, you can we can live together, as I demonstrate here in this lab. It's the same AD environment. We can work together. Some of the things that ATA is best known for is if you go directly to the DC, if you are launching some kind of enumeration and PSExec or any other zero-day against the DC, they might be detecting it better than Javelin because their presence is on the DC. But in terms of other detection options like I did today, you need to have Javelin. You won't be detected. It won't be detected by ATA, so best practice would be using Javelin as well. But we can definitely work together. If you already have ATA, we are not interfering with this system at all.
Great, thank you very much. That's really the four main questions I've got. If you have other questions, please submit them while we have some time. Almog, I didn't know if you were going to show another demo or not. We do have 10 minutes left for the hour, if you're able to stay on. We still have everybody that logged in at the top of the hour and frankly before is still on, and I want to thank everybody for your time. So obviously it's been a useful presentation. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I will do another scenario. Just want to quickly sum up these differences. We know from experience, we have more than 10 years experience, the founders and the people who works in Javelin, we know how much the operational guys, whether it's Active Directory team, security team, they work really hard to implement and deploy solution inside the network. And if it's kind of a headache or if it costs lots of money and people and time, it would be very difficult to deploy inside the network. So in terms of install, if you compare Javelin to the Microsoft ATA, there is a really huge difference when it comes to the install and deployment. When it comes to the presence, huge difference. Our solution is residing inside the memory and inside the endpoint memory. ATA presence lives inside the DC, domain controller. It is inspecting the traffic and the Active Directory logs. In terms of detection, because we are using a deception techniques and we are using deception approach, and we are very deterministic, meaning any obfuscated object would be detected by Javelin, and we can say that it's 100% attack. From ATA point of view, it's very limited. There is a limit, as I mentioned before, to the amount of things that you can detect by being on the DC. Two things that ATA doesn't really have is the forensic and mitigation. We are doing it automatically from our virtual machine, going immediately to the endpoint and getting all the information that's needed and contain the process. And also another system and operational costs when it comes to multiple forests. You have so many companies in the world that have acquired other companies, and even for other reasons, they have multiple forests, multiple Active Directory forests. We do support multiple forests and domain within the same system, where ATA, as long as I saw in their documents, they are limited to a per forest system. So this is very important to remember. I will try to do some extra demo with the time that being left. Another very common technique that being done when it comes to credentials, assuming you didn't succeed with brute force and you didn't succeed with the LSAS getting any credentials there, you can also compromise another weak spot in the Active Directory called the service account and Kerberos tickets, where you can basically, sorry for that, you can basically dump and request service account, service principal names accounts. What you're seeing right now on the screen is all the computers object with their service principal name. And when you see such list, you can basically request, if you don't have Javelin, you can request from the domain controller, please give me that SPN identity, let's call it, let's simplify it by calling it identity. And if you see some interesting SPN like this one, for example, and you are trying to request it, you basically get like a file, a Kerberos file encrypted. You can crack it locally, and then you can use, after you crack it, you eventually get a password for that account, meaning that you can use that password later on to move laterally. So, for example, if I would try to use this specific SPN using a K-list, for example, just to get it, when you have Javelin, eventually you fail. The attacker will fail in this kind of request, and you're supposed to get another alert, as you can see in the system, called computer information gathering, and the same procedure on and on. We detect the alert. We see that the attacker failed in his request, whether it's brute force, LSAS, Kerberos tickets, Kerberos requests. We get all this information about this malicious activity. We get this forensics. We can mitigate these malicious processes automatically or manually, as I mentioned here in the demo, and everything being done very seamlessly, automatically through your endpoint environment. In the end of the day, to complete this mission around lateral movement and intelligence gathering inside your network. It's your own house. You should control it. There is no real reason why attacker would go freely inside your network. So this is the mission of Javelin, and I hope this makes sense to you and everything was clear as much as I could.
Great. A couple other questions before the end of the time. We have 5 more minutes here. So question is, how do you work with endpoints that are whitelisted and include memory protection?
As far as we see, as I mentioned before about the endpoint, whether it's AV, EDR, DLP, we tested it with so many vendors that we can say very confidently that we can work together with any of this solution, whether it's memory protection or AV traditional. From our perspective, it's the same. We have unique intelligence and technique to inject this specific presence into the endpoint. And long story short, we can work together with them as well.
Could you comment quickly on how our solution compares to a honeypot solution in terms of deployment time or changes to the AD or network?
Great. So it's very important to, even that we are using a deception approach, it's very important to understand that we are not part of this distributed deception layer or other distributed deception companies. We have client-side presence only on the endpoint. As you can see from operational point of view, all you need to do is just simply select the computers and deploy them. You don't need to create more virtual machines. It doesn't really create any information on the domain controller. The information that you got and you see from the endpoint that Javelin was installed is only its perspective. From a domain controller perspective, we don't change this domain controller at all. All these OU and objects inside this domain controller are not being changed or manipulated. It's only client side. And when it comes to deception companies, other deception companies, it's not scalable by design. You have limitation to the amount of honeypot and virtual machine and services that you can deploy inside your network. And to be frank, it's not relevant to the current APT methodology. Attackers are not doing any network scan. This is their main advantage, the honeypot approach where attackers are doing a network scan, and it's not relevant to this today techniques and methodology. So first of all, no detection in terms of APT, and from deployment operational point of view, it's totally different. It's minimum time comparing to, I don't know how many days you need to deploy this distributed deception.
Great. I've got a couple other questions, but
Sure.
we're out of time here. I know there's some questions that would like to show some other pieces around mitigation, how we automate either kicking the attacker off the computer off the network, or even shutting the computer down. If you would like, let's do one more thing. There is a poll I'd like to just show for everybody. Just quickly, if you would take some time, if you'd like some further information, we would certainly love to tell you about it. We can do quick proof of concepts, quick demos. There are a number of videos that are out on our website, as well as YouTube, Javelin Networks. We have a channel, as well as many videos out there that are showing comparisons of Javelin versus attack techniques, as well as information about how pretty much all the major attacks today, their compromises, it's less concern of how they got on the machine, but more the concern of how are they moving and staying present with persistence, being undetected for months. As the example, of course, worldly known about Equifax. To me, it's not they got compromised. The fact that they were, surfing around there for 4 months, completely undetected, extricating the files, for over 150 million, American citizens. That is what's so bothersome. And frankly, it's all done through Active Directory knowledge in most cases to get around from one place to another, again, undetected. Of course, attackers can smash and grab and just take and go, but that's not the problem today. The problem is this is continuous persistence. So I want to thank everybody for your time. Almog, you've done a great job. I really appreciate it. If you have more questions, please send them directly to myself or to Almog. We are both on the website. You can also do hello@javelin-networks.com and get back to us. So thank you again, everyone. And this will be recorded, and we will put this back out on the web as soon as that recording is complete. So thank you again. Have a great day.